I don't need no one to say you're complicated. 'Cause I knew from the start this might be overrated. It's so typical, you wanna give you one more try. Even though if your mind is telling you it's all a lie. Oh, I gotta wake up. This might be a breakup. 'Cause I don't believe you when you say that you miss me. 'Cause where are your actions to prove me you're different? When I say I need you and you head the direction that's leading away from me, baby. I don't believe you, no. 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 One thing I love about you is your dedication. It got me dreaming at the station. On my way home, oh, I gotta wake up. This might be a breakup. 'Cause I don't believe you when you say that you miss me. 'Cause where are your actions to prove me you're different? When I say I need you and you head the direction that's leading away from me, baby. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't believe you, no. 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 Oh, I gotta wake up. This might be a breakup. 'Cause I don't believe you when you say that you miss me. 'Cause where are your actions to prove me you're different? When I say I need you and you head the direction that's leading away from me, baby. I don't believe you, no. 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 'Cause I don't believe you when you say that you miss me. 'Cause where are your actions to prove me you're different? When I say I need you and you head the direction that's leading away from me, baby. Yeah, yeah.
Happy birthday!
Ooh, yeah.
Nice.
Isn't that phenomenal? Now,
That
my
is great.
processor is not keeping up, and then a nice little snow at the end. We can keep that going all day if we want to.
That is a
There's like-
complicated graphic.
Isn't
Yeah.
it really complicated graphic? Hey, check this out. Welcome to the Pandemic Podcast, everyone. This is Matt, Dr. Steven Kissler, Dr. Mark Kissler. We're going off the script on, well, we usually do a normal intro, and today we're not because it's our birthday. We turned 1 today. You guys look so grown up. I wish you would have had the stashes.
I know, me too. I wish
Yeah.
that every day when I wake up without a mustache.
Man.
Yeah.
But it's nice. You're both without a mustache. Just kind of keeping it good. We're like, you guys, first you guys had the both in the mustache. Could hardly tell you apart. Now you both don't have it. So you guys are twins. This is great. Well, welcome everyone to the Pandemic Podcast Live. We're streaming through my personal Facebook, through the pandemic, and then we put up our own YouTube channel. We have 2 subscribers. It's huge. We're going viral on YouTube. So check it out. We have a special episode today. So we have a lot to cover, like fun stuff, because this is going to be about reflection. So about the past year, what's been going on, how this all got started, all this great stuff. So I want to get started with talking about, you guys, man, it's been a year. March 5th was our first episode. And I want to share right now This is all, Steven and Mark have no clue about what's going on. They're just sitting ducks right now. And you know what? We're changing this on. We're going to do a roast instead of a toast. We're going to modify everything and just roast you for an hour. No, we're not going to do that. We have a lot of things I want to honor you guys for. But the first thing we'll get started with is, you listen to this is our first part of our first episode. It's 3 minutes long, guys. Hang in there.
Man.
Listen to this. This is snippets from our very first episode, right? So I know you guys never like listening to Mark. I know you cannot stand listening to your voice. Even though you have such a great voice. It's phenomenal. So here is from our first episode. I hope I have it tagged up correctly. Little snippets of what was going on when we first got on. Here we go.
And can you just set the stage of what, as of today, it's March 5th, Thursday, where are we at with the coronavirus in the U.S.?
Over the past couple of weeks, we've seen an increase in the number of cases of coronavirus in the United States. And I think that, as it stands today, we have on the order of 100 confirmed cases. So those are people who have been tested or presumed positive for the virus. And the last I checked, there have been 11 deaths so far.
And, a follow-up question with that is, okay, so we're looking at, in the United States, you said 100 confirmed cases, right? That's right. So this seems disproportionately huge as a rate of death. Can you speak into this briefly? Is it just, are we seeing a higher, a worse virus, or is there something else involved possibly here?
I was just wondering, I've seen a couple different statistics comparing this coronavirus to some of the other flu pandemics that we've seen in terms of, mortality or, case fatality rates. Can you speak a little bit to what you're seeing with that?
I can probably distill this into a couple of key questions that we're still trying to answer. So one of them is that mortality rate, which carries along with it really just how many people are actually getting infected with this thing. That's really the primary question that people are interested in learning is how widely is this thing spreading, and what does that mean for its severity?
Yeah, that's, I think you're pointing to another really important point, which is when we think about the transmissibility of a lot of these diseases, and correct me, Stephen, based on this understanding, there's a component that's intrinsic to the disease, right? There's a certain amount that each virus has a degree of transmissibility, that's higher or lower than other viruses. But there are also other modifiable things that go into that calculation, like, for instance, schools being open or closed, that sort of thing. Can you talk a little bit about that and kind of your modeling?
What are the most common ways it's given to another person? But clearly, it's not just surfaces, right? It's like the level of surfaces, like whether it's a box or it's on stainless steel, that kind of stuff. So on the news, I just heard my wife talking about a friend who read an article that they needed to buy a bunch of water and put it in their house. And what's the realistic perspective at this point in time? And basically, I think the biggest question I have is why? You can be asymptomatic and have no symptoms, and you're contagious. So there's no way to even know whatsoever. And so there's a really a sense of feeling out of control. And I know you said that is true, but you mentioned something about how there seems to be evidence that there's a difference a little bit between the asymptomatic contagiousness and those who actually have symptoms. Can you speak a little bit maybe what small things you've seen there? How in your life are you trying to maintain a sense of realness, right? How are you staying grounded, and what advice do you give to someone who is hearing to bombarded by all their friends of basically build a bunker, go underground, and come out in maybe a few years, and this kind of apocalyptic nature? How are you guys trying to remain grounded as a family and in your work?
That's a year ago, March 5th. Some things have changed dramatically. 100 cases, right? Now we're at millions of cases. We're storing water. We're afraid as heck. We don't know what to expect. And now we're in this whole different ball game. So appreciative of you guys and taking us along this whole journey, helping me. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, a reflection about just how we got here. And there's people who just gave some comments. I'll post those in just a minute. But I want to start with this. One of my favorite moments, there's lots of them, is a story. And this is going to be fun. About your guys' childhood, about elementary school, right? Right. So that was I gotta learn about you guys. You're not just adults now. You guys were little kids, and you were little smart kids too. And so I thought, what better time than to bring on a guest to talk about your elementary school times to the crowd. So I thought, let's bring on. I have Kirsten right here.
Oh,
so
no way.
Hi. What's up?
Wow, it's so good to see you. I can't believe this.
Well, it is great to see you guys. This is so much fun.
Yeah.
It's been great to have you, Kirsten. Thanks for coming on. So fun. Now it might get a little choppy. I'm on a Mac that with 4 people on here, it might get a little choppy, but nonetheless, we're going to try to make this happen. Kirsten, I want to hear, and I want for everybody listening, of a story about Mark and Steven that maybe just anything you got that could just embarrass them incredibly largely, or whatever you got. But I want to hear about how they were as kids and how they changed as adults.
Well, actually, the amazing thing is they still look the same, which is so awesome.
That actually does not surprise me. They look like little kids.
Uh, well, I actually got to know first their mom, who is the most amazing, generous, joyful, kind woman that I've ever known. And so 28 years ago is my first year teaching, and I think I had Mark in my second year, possibly. Mark, did you ever spend the night in the classroom?
I don't think so. I think
I only did that
I think
one
I was
year.
pre that. Yeah.
Okay, I only did that one time. So
Oh, that sounds like a
that
blast.
was my
Yeah.
first year. Yeah, it was pretty crazy. But anyway, with all the whole class, not just one student.
Oh yeah, that's good. Good qualification.
Yeah. So I got to know Jodine, and so she would come into my class and help out with everything. But so she was so super just so encouraging to me as a new teacher. And so I was always amazed because I couldn't teach Mark. He was so smart. Everything we did, he probably did as a 6-month-old. I don't know. But I just thought that he was more of like a Doogie Howser. Like he could have taught all the way up to 6th grade. And so, but Jodine was always so encouraging and just always trying to, say, it's okay, and I respected her actually keeping the boys at their grade level and never like skipping them ahead grades when they really actually could have. But I have a couple fun memories with Mark. One is going to one of his soccer games, because I used to always tell my students that we made an end of the school year video where I would go visit all the kids and different things they did. And they invited me to soccer games. And so that was really fun to just watch him play. And the other one was we were doing a poetry unit, and most 3rd graders are, roses are red, violets are blue, just very rhymey. And Mark wrote this incredible poem. And I don't know if it is still in the Castle Rock Elementary Library, but it was from the perspective of a book. And it was so amazing. And so it was incredible. And so everyone loved it. They framed it and the librarian hung it up there. And I just love that. So those are just a couple of my memories. Steven, I actually never had Steven in my class. He was kind of a surrogate student that I loved because I loved Mark and I loved his mom. And so the classic story, of course, I know you guys said it, was we had a school assembly, and there was, I think is my computer freezing?
Nope, you're good.
You're good.
Okay.
You're fine.
But we had a school assembly, and he had a substitute teacher that day. And the teacher just filed out of the gym back to the classroom, and all of a sudden I saw Steven just kind of wandering in there. And so I went up and asked him if he was okay, and he just said, I don't know where my class is. And so I just walked him down to his room. It was just so cute. But one of my favorite memories of Steven is we used to meet at Village Inn and go to lunch, or meet at the outlet malls and go to lunch and stuff. And so one day we were at Village Inn, and Steven was in 1st grade, I think, reading the book Matilda by Roald Dahl, which is like a sick, and he was cracking up and just actually comprehending what he was reading. And that actually just sticks in my mind. I was so amazed by that. But it's just a dream for teachers, especially younger kids. You don't ever really get to see them. And I've kept in touch with Jodine through Christmas cards and phone calls. And I just have gotten to hear, boys, all the wonderful things that you've done. I went to CU too, so that was fun to hear about your years there. And I'm just so proud of you. And it's just wonderful, the God-given gifts that you have and how you are just humbly using them. It's amazing. So I just love seeing your faces. I've loved listening to this podcast. I feel like I know someone famous.
Me too. Stephen Mark. Great.
Yeah,
Thank
so-
you. Thank you. Thank you so much. What a treat to see you. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Well, I would love to see you in person. Wait, maybe we can meet up. Yes, I got to go to lunch with your mom and your dad and your grandma, right
Oh,
kind of
good.
before all this happened. We met in Colorado Springs. And
I remember. Yep.
that was just wonderful.
Yep. Well, we'll have to do it. We'll have to get all together again once we can. That sounds great. How cool.
Yeah.
That does sound great.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kirsten, for coming on. It's so awesome to. I was like, when I first saw her last week, when we kind of came on to test this stuff, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, did you teach them when you were like 18 years old? Because I was like thinking in my mind it's just differently. I'm like, great, you are a new teacher back then, but that's awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on, Kirsten, and just honor them and listen to the podcast. And hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. You guys take care.
It's
great to see you. Take
See ya.
care.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. How was that?
Well, there you go. I knew that when I came on and you were so excited, Matt, I was like, okay, we're gonna see what happens.
Yeah, this is
That's right.
this is
It's
a
gonna be
full-on-
elementary school.
Full on fun stuff going on.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, Molly
That's great.
from Ohio says, "Oops, got that messed up." Happy
That's
birthday
nice.
to us. It's awesome.
Hey,
Is
thanks.
this
So-
live too? That's
Yes,
cool.
live. Yeah. So we
Wow.
can see that on live. So we got happy
Oh, cool.
birthday. And we're gonna be this for a podcast version. Oh, this is somebody I don't think anybody's ever seen before. Who's this person?
There you go.
Kirsten, we
That's
love
the
you guys.
secret. My secret wife. She makes fun of me because I don't talk about the family so much on the podcast.
awesome.
She's like,
Well, that reminds me. I was like, I should have brought on Allie on this just to do a follow up to make sure that he still doesn't get lost and that she has to bring him back
That's
to
right.
certain places to see whether he's grown or whether he still needs that kind of attention.
Thanks, Katie.
Gosh. That's awesome. And then another happy birthday from Deborah.
oh yeah.
Okay, let's dive into a little bit of reflections for a little bit before we add more fun to the fire here. And you guys love the background, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Keep it going.
Legit.
It's great.
It's awesome. Little coronavirus and antibodies. I found this thing. I'm like, this is legit. So let's talk about reflections here. Let's talk about things where, let's just start the stage of where this all started. How, gosh, man, it was into February. I was like, I kind of like got this. Well, it probably was like end of November, like Thanksgiving, Christmas. Like I started getting noticed that the coronavirus is kind of in China. My wife had tons of questions, and it was just like I couldn't answer them, and I didn't know what to do. And I'd find all these news articles, and it seemed like they would contradict each other, and I felt a little lost. And then I tried to find podcasts. At that time, there was like almost no podcasts on coronavirus in December, right? And even January, there wasn't. And then this random thing happened. Now, some of you guys may have heard this story who listened to the podcast, but if you haven't, this is how it all began, where it was probably then in February where all of a sudden a Facebook post from Stephen came on about this reflections on COVID. And I totally forgot like Stephen's history and what he was doing. And it was so good. I'm like, oh my gosh. And then I had this idea like, oh man, I need to have a podcast on this. We should do a podcast because there's no out there and I can't get any good information and it's all over the place. And I just don't know where to land on. And so then I contacted Stephen. He was willing to have a phone call. We talked about it. He's like, sure, I'll do it, whatever. And then I'm like, can your brother come on too? and so he's like, I don't know. I asked him, right? So I asked him. and it was funny because Mark was just like, well, I'm usually not used to like spontaneous things. I like to plan things out. And I'm like, dude, this is a pandemic. You've got like one day to decide. so he said yes, and we came on, and it started. And literally, it was like 2 days after Mark said yes, we had our first publishing. And at that point in time, it was 100 cases in the U.S. 4 or 5 deaths, and now we're in this whole other situation now where we're in some in some sense not all that great, but in another sense, I was looking at my Evernote, and so if you guys don't know, we use Evernote, so this is like my godsend for clipping articles, and I wanted to do like a test, like how many articles has Matt clipped since March 5th, and the tally is 1,049 articles I've clipped and gone through since March 5th. And I looked at the very first one. The very first one was Dr. Fauci talking about, I don't know if who it was, but just how unlikely it would be that we'd ever get a vaccine in a year. A year and a half to 2 to 3 years would be the minimum. And here we are, right on March 1st. We have like between 7 and 10% of the U.S. is vaccinated already. Right. This is like just remarkable progress. Tons of stuff have changed. And I want to hear you guys' reflections of like, Mark, if you want to chime in first, of just like how this all began and how things have changed for you.
Yeah, you bet. It was really interesting to listen to those, excuse me, to those first few, like, I just really remember the feeling that I had of like just kind of getting a handle on what was going on, and being kind of in this funny place where we're asked to respond in a formal way, both at work and amongst our families, and do all these things, but also just kind of getting a sense of like, where are we, and asking that question over and over again, like where are we, what's going on, how do we get a sort of a sense, because there's just nothing quite analogous to this experience before. So it was interesting, hearing those questions again, and then remembering sort of what the world was like, what we were thinking about at that time. I was like teaching a class up at CU Boulder, and we were talking about illness experiences and what it was like to engage illness in this kind of deep way on an individual level, and this was this utterly different thing that was coming, and it was it's a big gift for me to get to engage with both of you early on, because it really did kind of shape the way that I came to understand the pandemic, but also that I was able to sort of engage with it in my own in my own local relationships and stuff. I was thinking a lot about, it was incredible to see Miss Everett on, and thinking a lot about sort of one of the things about this podcast and about this year has been the different people who have been kind of, our faithful listeners and correspondents, and thinking deeply with us off air to help us, do whatever it is that we do. And so I was thinking, my wife and I have had just like a lot of deep conversations about these things, and a lot of which ends up, on air in one way or another. Deb, our parents, think about a lot of really close friends, like Mitch and Colin, Stephen knows, Eitan, and many others. I'm sure I'm forgetting a lot, who are just like very faithful listeners and correspondents through, and just shout outs to kind of everybody who's been a part of it over the last year. It's been fun, and it's been, in a lot of ways, I think it's just been this interesting extension of these relationships in a time where that sort of thing is more difficult. And so that's been one of the gifts for me, has been having this space where we can have conversation, communication, come to understand things in this sort of messy and grappling kind of way, in a time where the spaces in which we can do that have been really rarefied. It's just very tough to have that kind of casual conversation. And so that's one of the reasons this has been a big gift for me, for sure.
Stephen, how about you?
Yeah, it's so interesting, like coming back on a year, because it's even about like the weather outside and the length of the days and stuff. It just like puts me sort of right back in that space, and reminds me a lot more vividly of sort of what was going on a year ago than I've really been able to call up since. So this has been a super interesting time for reflection. So maybe I'll start by just sort of talking about like what was going on then, and then how this podcast sort of slipped into that, and then really became a central part of what I was thinking about and what I was doing at the beginning of the pandemic. I mean, as an epidemiologist, it was a really strange January and February, because I sort of felt like I could see this thing coming. My colleagues could see this thing coming. And so when I went into work, there was this real awareness and a really sudden shift towards this like activity. I mean, it almost like, I really try to avoid like militant analogies here, but it really shifted from lab meetings to like war room briefings, where we were like we would have these presentations where we would just give updates on the latest observations, the latest data that was coming in, and trying to just get our hands on what was going on week after week. And then I would, go home, and the world was just sort of as usual. I remember beginning of March, Ali and I with two friends of ours went to see a play. We went to see Fiddler on the Roof at the Opera House here in Boston, and this was the week before everything just shut down. And it was just so wild because I knew that there was coronavirus spreading in Boston, everywhere else, but we were packed into this theater with like thousands of people, right? And so I had this really strange experience of sort of being in this place that I almost felt like there was this impending something happening, but there was no sort of acknowledgement of it outside of my workplace, really. And so that's part of what was behind that Facebook post that you mentioned, Matt, where I was just trying to find like some way to both process to myself what was going on, to think about more clearly, what is it that I actually see? What is it that my colleagues are talking about? And how can I try to bring some of that reality to the people I know and love? And so, as things sort of escalated, it was, there was really this sense of like anxiety and just trying to grapple with, what was going to happen. And so this podcast really helped, speak into that, right? You gave me that phone call, and we talked through a whole bunch of different things, and it was the first time that I had been called to not be sort of an academic consultant, but to just sort of speak to something as a friend, to be like, what's going on here, and like, what do we need to be prepared for, and like, what should I specifically be doing in my particular context? And it was a great conversation, Matt. Like I really enjoyed getting to speak with you about that. And so when you proposed this idea, it just made so much sense to me, because it was a way of both communicating what I was seeing, and hopefully having a larger reach, but also learning a lot, just like through conversation with you, with Mark, to just get a broader sense that's not just confined to these epidemiologists sitting in a room and trying to read the data, but like what's it like to have a family and young kids in this context? What's it like to be a doctor? What's it like to be teaching students? And I think that that's so important, especially for us as epidemiologists, to really have, as much as we can, that breadth of experience too. So it's been really good, and I think that it's been a huge part of my own experience of the pandemic, and I'm so grateful for it.
Yeah, it's hearing you guys talk, so many things come to mind of just like, before I contacted Stephen, and like the week before, like the last week of February, and it felt like, hey, this is going to become something big. And I remember having to sit down with my wife, Jan, who was already on her radar screen probably in January, and just saying, I don't want to be an alarmist, but I think you need to tell your mother that she needs to start staying home now, right? And this is the end of February. I mean, the cases were like, maybe there was 1 or 2 cases in Colorado, but I'm like, hearing what I do, so having these conversations and when to pull the trigger, and this was hard for me, like when to pull the trigger to say something that could cause an over-alarming sense of, like, I don't want to create over-alarm, but if I feel like this is the right thing, and this became really confusing for me. So then I'm like, man, I need Stephen, I need Mark, and it's been a huge gift. I mean, I don't even know where to begin. I'm not going to go on a diatribe on this, but like, it has like really changed the course of my entire life. Like, I really feel like I was in the shower this morning and thinking about what are we going to talk about, and I feel like, I don't know if it's a right analogy, but I feel like my life has, in some areas, has changed complete different tracks. Like, there's no really end point. I don't feel like I get to a point where like I've got to a place where like, okay, this part's checked off my list. This is where I'm at in my life. I just feel like I'm constantly going, and I'm on a different track, and I kind of moved to different tracks. And this was like a large track shifting element for me in many different areas. I mean, the idea of like, it's complicated, the idea of the nuances, there's so many individual conversations that you guys have had with me on the recording that just really shifted things for me. Like, when anything to the Black Lives Matters and how it incorporates into epidemiology and science, and talking about global warming and how indirectly that the common denominators also can impact COVID, where I was getting these like trite bite-sized pieces of information that were radically right or left that weren't seeing the complete picture. And it was you guys that really helped me think, oh my gosh, it really is complicated, right? It is nuanced. And so this just shifted so many things for me. I'm so grateful. I mean, this really has been a self-serving podcast for me. Like, totally. If there was just 2 listeners, I'd be like, let's keep going. Because but there's not. There's more than that. So it's just been a huge shift.
Appreciate that. It's been, hopefully there's been something that's been helpful. I think something that's been helpful for everybody who's been, engaged in one way or another. It's definitely been helpful for me, and I think there's so much about this that I'm still in process about, and, Stephen's in process about, and so I think one of the things it's tough to be in process in front of other people sometimes about some of these things. And so I hope that there's some good, it's nice to hear about that there was some good fruits of that. And, I think I'm in the same boat as you, I think, in terms of just like continuing to uncover, the complexity and the nuance and hopefully a little bit of the truth of what's going on and how we can bring ourselves to bear on it in the best possible way.
Yeah. And Katie, your wife here, says, I remember listening to the first episode while we were coming home from the Children's Museum of all places. That's like the Germ Fest. And suddenly it dawned on me how much things were going to change.
Yeah.
And wondering how many services we had licked while at the museum.
Yeah, all of them. The answer to that is all of them.
All of them. Oh my gosh. It is
100%.
like when you have children, it is a game changer when it comes to like what you do when they're young, because they really are going to like lick and touch. And it's just like, it was those first months, man. March was it was tough. I mean, hearing that first episode, like, that's why I mentioned those reflections of like surfaces with Stephen. I'm like, because that's what it was like. I don't know what's going on, and we're locked in, and we can't get food for like 2 weeks.
Right.
Like all the grocery stores were like, I couldn't get toilet paper. It was just madness.
When we were talking about like, can we bring them to a playground? Like, what does that look like? If we, is that safe? And then there's like a million kids at the playground because they just closed school. I remember that, those sorts of conversations too. Just trying to navigate, how do we get through the days?
Absolutely. So throwing it out there, like what, I had some of these questions I wanted to ask you guys. We had a quick reflection. What was one of your most unexpected joys of the podcast? Now, you guys already kind of fused some of this in, but to bring it down to a point, is there a particular kind of joy that was unexpected that came from doing this podcast so far? Mark? Stephen?
That's a great question. I think for me, I think it's important. One of the big themes, I think, of this year, excuse me, sorry. I've been,
hey, it's early in the morning.
I know it's early in the morning. I didn't do I should have done my vocal exercises before. I don't do vocal exercises, but I didn't this morning either. That was a problem.
Yeah, that's a problem. Totally. You have it.
So, I think what I'm thinking about is the the extreme kind of mixedness of this year and holding together the bad and the good. I think there's a certain sense that the world that we saw in the hospital and the world that we saw in the news, for me, there was a tremendous amount of tragedy this year, and kind of family tragedy and trauma in this way that one of the analogies that I think is the most apt that I've seen in a couple of places is about COVID, sort of like a tornado, where it like devastates certain households and then passes others completely by. And so you're asking about joy. I think for me, there's this sense of being able to hold together, that extreme, just the trauma of seeing, patients, people, and also colleagues deeply affected by this. And then also to have a place where to process that a little bit, to talk about the big picture and to stay grounded. And so I think that having a sense of community in the midst of the crisis, that was not something that was just adding on outrage and adding on, crisis, nor was it looking away from it. I think that to me is kind of the meaning of that. If joy more than enjoyment, the joy was the sense of like, I can hold those difficult things and still bring them, to you guys and talk through it and be serious about it. But also recognize the goodness of things that are coexisting with that. So it's very, very mixed. This year's been just so incredibly hard. I don't think we can overstate how hard it's been, especially for a lot of people in our community who don't have the public voice that we have. And so just being able to kind of hold that together, with this time with you guys has been the biggest joy for me.
Stephen, you.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've been thinking about that I regret the most from this past year was that and this is just on a personal scale, but I haven't kept much of a journal over the past year. I've not really done a lot of writing. I normally don't, but there was a moment early on in the pandemic when I thought, like, this might be something worth just like jotting down some of my experiences. But with just the absolute craziness of everything, all of the time that I spent writing was spent writing about the virus and not about sort of what I was thinking and feeling at the time. But then, one of the joys then that came from this this podcast and from seeing you guys so frequently is that I think during a time when things have felt so random and it's easy to give into the temptation of meaninglessness and lack of structure, these regular conversations have sort of helped put this thread sort of through the entire year. And I think without that thread, it would be very difficult to sort of see the passage of time and to see the interconnectedness between things. And there's something almost of ritual and of plugging in this microphone every time and grabbing the headphones off the wall. There's something about this embodied sense of just like regular coming back to do this thing that's the same but different every time. And that has allowed me to sort of deepen this experience of it. And yeah, just this connection that sort of helps tie together this whole year. It's so much has changed, and the world has changed, and the relationships that I have like changed, and they've changed in nature, and they've changed in type and in number, yeah, and so it's I think it would be really hard to find a solid ground without something that had been just very sort of regular like that. And so having this sort of communication, this sort of dialogue, and just this process of just doing it again and again and again has really been this deep sort of joy that has helped sort of dispel some of the what might feel like a lack of meaning or a lack of a lack of, I don't know what else, but some kind of lack that this year has really been characterized by.
Yeah, when you were mentioning about the idea of change, I think the greatest joy for me, I mean, I have a lot of joys. It's like I said, this podcast was really about for me. I did it selfishly, and it grew to be something bigger. It helped thousands of people. We'll hear from some of them soon from recordings and that kind of stuff, but it's been enormously helpful. I think the biggest thing, Stephen, you mentioned change. Like, I have changed so much. Things have changed so much. My friendships have changed so much. I'm just glad I had you guys regularly to change along with me. There was something there that kind of helped me process the change and know and to deepen it, to allow it to become stronger than itself. Now, granted, there are still things that I'm still working on in the midst of my own change, but that's been huge. Another big joy for me is just the community here, out beyond just ourselves, but like the thousands of people who have been listening to us in the comments. Like, this really is like, it's hard not to get teary-eyed, guys, because like hearing their voices, reading their comments or emails, and just realizing, like, I don't even know how to explain it. The fact that we could be so far apart, but actually addressing the same thing with the same humanity and the same concerns and the same heart and the same struggles and the same confusion. The sense of solidarity has been way bigger for me. And that's been like, this is like a huge gift. Like, I just like, wow. Like, I've heard about like podcasting and building communities and how cool it can be, but it was just from the outside. On the inside, it really is just been probably one of the greatest joys, for sure. Let's move on to maybe an unexpected hardship to talk about. That's Stephen. I'll start with you. What's an unexpected maybe hardship that's come about from the podcast?
Yeah, I think that maybe Mark articulated it first, but I was sure thinking it too, you know, that like you don't go off and be a mathematician because you like talking to people, you know. It's like it's which, you know, and of course, like that's a little bit facetious. Like I do love like community. I have very close friends and people, you know. There's nothing I love more than like a deep and far-ranging conversation with people I enjoy. But this there was sort of especially at the beginning, almost a relentlessness to it, where I was immersed in the pandemic, in my work, in my private thoughts. And then when we started recording, we were doing this 3 times a week, you know, and so we were being called to, you know, like I would get on basically every other day, and then try to distill those things that I had been thinking and to communicate them in a way that was, you know, intelligible and ideally calm, but also appropriately serious. And there was just this real difficulty to it. I mean, I remember there are so many reasons why I was exhausted during the first couple of months of this pandemic, but this was one of them. You know, it was really, really difficult to just come and do that day after day, and especially because, you know, it's so funny because I think that I like to think that my bearing on the podcast has been relatively even keeled, but what you don't see is what happens outside of that, and the times when I've just been, you know, just an absolute wreck that usually Allie has had to try to sort of piece together, you know, as I'm just like pacing the room and speaking in half sentences because I don't understand what's going on and I don't know why things are as crazy as they are, and so there was something really difficult about sort of having to engage that, you know, time after time after time, but nevertheless to sort of dive into my own uncertainty, my own deep fear, and just lack of understanding, and yet to try to come up with something that was true and articulate, and so it was an immense just sort of mental and emotional struggle, especially towards the beginning. But, you know, of course, that's borne a lot of fruit, I think, especially, I mean, just for me, I've gotten a lot more comfortable with it, and it has really helped, you know, despite all of the difficulty. I think that, you know, even compared to some colleagues, it really helped me to clarify my thoughts and to establish sort of what is it that I think about this, rather than just sort of following along with whatever is going on, whatever communications are happening within my community, to really sort of solidify my own voice through dialogue with you both. So incredibly difficult, but incredibly good.
I could imagine, man. I could imagine. Mark, what about you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think I want to echo that the sense of like continually being pushed into those uncomfortable places, right? To those questions, or those places where it feels like even societally we're kind of pulling apart and we're seeing the fraying, you know, and to try and just like go back into that place every, you know, as often as we meet, I think it's tough, you know, but it's also important. I think it's pulled, you know, a good thing out of me to try and do that. And, you know, hopefully I've developed a little bit more endurance for that kind of engagement. You know, I like the analogy that came up, or not quite an analogy, but just this sense of like, one of the things that we can do, I think, is create a space in which we can have an authentic conversation, and then we can just kind of say what we know and say what we believe to be true, kind of in that space, and just kind of keep saying that, you know, and not get too embroiled in the, you know, all the other side things that are going on. I think there's there can be a frustration in the sense that sometimes that doesn't feel like it's enough, you know, that it doesn't feel like it's reaching all the places that it needs to reach, or that things that feel settled in my own heart are like very much not settled out in the world. And there's, you know, controversy and, you know, back and forth about these things that are deeply affecting other people's lives. You know, that's hard to watch. It's hard for me to see. And this podcast pulled me back into that place, you know, again and again and again. But I think that's also one of the gifts of it too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think similarly for me, a couple of things is number one, just the time. It was more time than I thought. You know, I was like, I got so excited about it. I was like, let's just do this. But you know, it takes time. It takes time to actually produce it. And I have a tendency to I like quality. So like trying to make the audio better and do all the back. Because I mean, I'm not the expert here. I'm bringing a different level so I can use some of my extra time to make it better and to bring it to more people. So that was a lot of my time I've been using. Also, I think the biggest thing, honestly, that really started to drag for me is checking the news multiple times a day for the sake of the podcast. Like I wanted to have a break. Like I just need a week where I'm not looking at COVID news. But like I can't. I have to keep looking at it. I have to keep snipping the articles so that Monday morning, at really early in the morning, I can go through all these articles, find the best ones, and we can talk about it because my expertise is limited, so it's based off the news. And so I can provide those questions and be like, what do you mean by this? What's going on with this? So I think if that emotionally has been draining for me. And that's been the biggest hardship, I think, for me as well. We'll do a quick round of this. We have a lot of things we want to do. I wanted to see if there's one quick thing you guys have learned from this podcast. Maybe you've already mentioned if there's one thing practically or whatever you learned from this podcast. Number one, I have to say for you guys, what you've learned is you've both grown, and you guys were all just, I think, great speakers to begin with, but you've grown so much to be able to like synthesize information and bring it in such a level where people can digest it so quickly. I mean, that's, for me, watching you guys already started strong, but the fact that you could fine tune that and make it even better, that's been a huge gift for me. What about you, Steve? What about you? What's been the biggest thing you've learned from this podcast so far?
Yeah, it's kind of just our tagline about that everything is complicated, right? But I think that, it's, of course, like I understood that on some level intellectually, right? But I think that what this entire pandemic has brought home, but especially these conversations, is just like how concretely, precisely, immediately things are complicated. And that really just like hit home in a way that it hasn't before, like what it means that to have certain policy decisions affect people who are raising kids and just trying to get them to school, and just like that interconnectedness of everything, and how sort of one decision at one end of the spectrum can just like filter all the way towards all sorts of different parts of society that you never would have imagined in this really way that affects people's lives on a deep, deep level. So I think it's been that, just seeing that repeat itself over and over again.
Yeah, Mark?
Yeah, I think it's the excuse me again, increasing tolerance for being for the imperfections and the not quite having things set before I speak into them. That I think there's something good about having all that set, but there's also something very real, and I think hopefully a little bit less prideful about just like, here's what we got, and like there's some things I know and here's some things I don't know, and there's a lot of complexity here that I haven't settled myself, and having an increased tolerance for that, I think, has been really good for me. So
that's great. Same thing. It's the whole thing. It's complicated. I remember in class, this is totally like when I was going to my MA in biblical studies, or it was before that, one of my mentors told me, you've got to earn the right to talk about predestination and free will. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. But like, it's such a complicated reality. Like, they basically said that, like, until you have gray hairs, don't even try to talk about it, right? And now if you have gray hair when you're 20, that doesn't work. So, but the concept is when you get a lot older, right? So the idea of throwing around it's complicated, I think same thing. You got to earn the right to call it complicated. Otherwise, people think, oh, you're just throwing that out. It's just like it's kind of a red herring or whatever. But I think this podcast has allowed me to earn the right to say things as complicated, because I've actually seen the nuances. You guys have helped me see it, like in its nuance. I'm like, oh my gosh, this really is complicated, and it doesn't mean it's overwhelming. That's the biggest thing I wanted. Like, that was the biggest take home. I can say it's complicated and not be overwhelmed. That was a huge fruit for me. So things like hospitalizations are not really being overrun. Masks don't work. You are a hypocrite if you allow racial injustice marches and prevent other public gatherings. The left is using COVID to uphold a global warming agenda. The flu is no different from COVID, right? All these things. I'm like, it's complicated. It's complicated. And this has helped me like, no, this is why it's complicated. So that's the biggest thing I've learned. Okay. Let's get into the next phase. We have a lot to think. Now, one of our awesome and wonderful listeners presented us a top 10 reasons why I raised glass for 1 year pandemic podcast.
Whoa.
All right.
The production here, Matt, is just like, I'm so impressed with you right now. I can like hardly get my email to work some days. So this is great.
Okay, you ready guys for this? Top 10 reasons. All right. Oops, wrong thing. So let's get back to that. You just what
That was
what
nice.
you told me. You just that everything was so great. You just totally.
That's right.
Let
That's
me
right.
move that back over here. All right. There. I think we're good. Top 10 reasons. Hopefully it should work this time. Right? Number 10. No politics, only science and an understandable, casual conversation. Totally legit. I think that's absolutely correct. That's one of the biggest reasons why people subscribe to us. Number 9, verbalizing the need to grieve the lifestyle that has put on hold and then being inspired to make decisions to make future me proud. That's awesome. That's pretty phenomenal. I mean, the fact that we could do that to our listeners is a huge gift to be able to hold that in intention. Next one, number 8. Finding well-being and slowing life down and truly appreciating being at home, right? We talked about that. This is the whole part of trying to live the most real life in the difficult situations. Number 7, sharing expertise in real time at the starting point of 100 cases in the U.S. we talked about to 28.5 million cases, 7% of the U.S. population fully vaccinated, right? We've gone through a long journey. I'm just so thankful for Stephen and Mark to be along this journey with us. Number 6, pointing out that the scientific method consists of evolving and changing knowledge. That's the point. And it doesn't make the reporting untrustworthy. That was, I think, a huge learning point for me as well. Just seeing that, like, people expose this and say, see, they're hypocrites, but this is the whole point of science. It's the progress of understanding and knowledge. Number 5, the ability for listeners to answer their friends' questions by beginning with their phrase, "My favorite epidemiologist says." That is legit. That's all the cred you need.
That's great.
I also use that phrase just for the record.
I'm sure you do.
That's, yeah.
Who happens to be my brother. So, 4, in the Matt Bodker voice,
nice.
equipping listeners to live the most real life possible in the face of this crisis. There we go. That's where I set my line.
Excellent.
Number 3, organizing a GoFundMe to deliver fiber optic internet to Dr. Mark Kistler's home, which we still need to do. Number 2, finding the gift in the difficult situation. That's a tough one, and that's a beautiful thing if you can get that. And finally, the number one reason why we raised glass to the pandemic this first is...
Yes.
I went back. Sorry, let's pull that back. Let's go back to this here. Let's hold on, guys. I messed that up.
I believe. Did that say what I thought it said, Matt? Was it?
Yes, it did, and I totally messed it up. Let's go back to number 1. It's if it can play. Let's see. Here we go. Does it do it? Oh, here we go. I see. Here we go. There we go.
There it is.
Sorry about that. That was the most dramatic one. The dueling mustaches on the live stream. This is why you got to be. You got to. If you want to like subscribe and help us, give $5 a month. You can see dueling mustaches on live stream. That was pretty.
That is
phenomenal. Okay.
right.
Was that
That's
pretty
great.
awesome? That's great.
That's great.
Okay.
And I think that really points out, I think, how much of this is such a co-construction too with our listeners. Like I really appreciate that articulation and sort of the way, some of those points are things I don't know if we ever said, explicitly, that those are things that our listeners are also bringing to us, and that's super awesome to get that kind of feedback in this medium. So.
It's been
Thanks
great.
for that.
But you're absolutely welcome. There's more to it, so let's get to it. I know we don't have too much time, about till 8:30 at the latest. But I want to give a few thank yous from people around the world. You guys remember Bruce, right? Bruce from Australia.
Of course, yeah.
Well,
I
he
was thinking about
gave us
Bruce.
a little video to let us know his appreciation.
Hi, Matt.
nice.
It's Bruce from Australia. I just wanted to say thanks very much for the podcast. It's been great. And big call out to Mark and Stephen, who had their expertise and really give some really good balance to the whole conversation. So it's been great listening, kept me sane, and it's, as you've always said, it's very complicated. And the one thing I've really picked up from the whole thing is the word nuance. So that's kept me going as well. So keep it up, guys. It's good to see you're on top of things and things are looking up. Okay, good luck.
All right.
Oh, that's great.
Wow, that's
Thanks.
super cool.
That's
Yeah.
Bruce from Australia, giving a little cred to you guys and appreciate the podcast. You guys remember Tina, right? Tina from Cyprus.
Oh yeah,
Right.
of course.
So she gave a little audio thing to thank you guys for the pandemic right here.
Hi guys, it's Tina from Cyprus. I can't believe it's been a year since you started this podcast. This is crazy. I'm not quite sure how a year has gone by, but happy anniversary. And thank you to all 3 of you for your dedication to the best pandemic podcast there is out there. I know you all have lives and families and jobs, so thank you not only for your time, but for your commitment as well. In general, the pandemic has created a special kind of exhaustion. And there isn't one way in which you've helped me. There are many ways. Back in March 2020, when all this really started to affect our lives, it felt so sudden, like it came out of nowhere. And it was a seriously overwhelming time. I remembered frantically trying to search for a reliable source to listen to. Something that was informative, impartial, non-political, but also human. Week after week, you seemed to answer all my questions so clearly and calmly, never pretending to know everything, and a simple 2-word explanation like, "It's complicated," helped me put it all into perspective. What I love the most is that even today, a year on, your discussions are still so interesting and up to date, and I really do value your opinions. I'm learning all the time. Matt, Stephen, and Mark, you are the dream team. Thanks for being you and for keeping me sane during these crazy times. Take care. Thanks, guys, and keep safe.
All right, that's Tina from Cyprus.
Wow,
So just
cool.
a number
Thanks.
of people who just want to give
Yeah. What a gift.
thank you.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's just been awesome. And there's more. Let's go. We're going to finalize these few more from coast to coast now. You guys remember my sister, Angie Long? She was on here early
absolutely.
on. She wanted to drop in just a little audio and just thank you guys for all you guys did as
Hi,
well.
Matt, Mark, and Steven. This is Angie in San Diego. I'm Matt's sister, and I also have the privilege of being on with you guys last year talking about some mental health issues. And congratulations on getting to the 1-year mark. Your podcast has been incredibly valued to me and my husband. We love it. I feel smarter. I feel like I understand things better. You guys are an antidote to the fear that can be out there when I'm consuming the news. And so I appreciate all the time you put in. I appreciate your opinions and expertise and how you guys always add this touch of humanity and recognizing the common humanity we have and just how to be together in all of this. So thanks so much. Keep up the good work. We listen every week. Bye.
And that's from my sister, who is fully vaccinated. That's been awesome.
Hey.
So it's been
Nice.
good. Hey. We got a few more here. John from California, go from California to coast. John here from California as well.
Hey guys, John Houghton from California. Just wanted to wish you guys a happy 1-year anniversary for the Pandemic Podcast. I've been listening since about September, and it's been great to be learning about the pandemic and what we should be doing and all that, and just really appreciate everybody's contributions. So start with Matt. It's been great to get to know Matt. Started talking with him on email when I was first sending my first questions, and just got to say that the Pandemic Podcast is the first podcast to not only respond to one of my questions, but to all of them. I've sent questions out to other podcasts, virologists, epidemiologists, doctors, and things like that. And I haven't heard back from any of them, but I always hear back from Matt. And so really appreciate Matt. And it's been fun getting to know him and finding about all the cool things he does. He's got a business on the side where he does consulting and coaching. And that's been a lot of fun to hear about. And so for Stephen, it's great to hear from a trained epidemiologist and providing depth and explaining the nuance behind why things are happening. Not that we know everything about why it's happening, but just what we've known so far about the diseases that have occurred to date. I always get some really rich nuggets every time I listen to the podcast and things I didn't think about. And maybe it'll be a new issue where I get to find out about it. And maybe it might be an old issue where I get to hear an explanation I think I know, but then I get a whole new level of meaning out of that. So it's great to hear and to receive your insight. And then finally for Mark, it's great to get the clinical perspective of what he's seeing in his practice. He's seeing COVID patients and to find out what's happening on the ground. And so that can be so invaluable. So really appreciate your podcast. Keep up the good work, guys. Thanks.
All right. John from California. Wanted somebody you know here. I think Britt from Denver. I think you might know her.
Hi, Pandemic Podcast team. I am Britt in Denver and wanted to send my appreciation for this podcast. What I love most is the authenticity. I've been listening to the podcast since before quarantine started, almost a year ago. And what's crazy is that was before the pandemic became political. And I love that with this crew, there's no angle, just the science, the public health perspective, and what to think twice about as a consumer of news. And it helps that I know the Kisslers, so I trust the source quite well. And I don't know you, Matt, but I love that you bring some lightness and entertainment to the podcast, as well as great questions. And you guys make a great team. And 9 months ago, I honestly hoped the podcast would become irrelevant and wondered what you all would do. But as the pandemic carried on, I didn't have to find a new favorite podcast. So I guess that's silver lining. And you all have continued to be my main source of trusted information, which I so appreciate. So I continue to recommend this podcast to family and friends. You guys are the best, and I can't wait to hear the anniversary episode.
Woohoo! And,
thanks, Britt.
That's Britt's awesome. That's awesome. I can't. I want to meet Britt someday. Another one here, North Carolina. This one got cut off. But I had to play it. I think she was. Drew was a minute 30, but the last part of it was really good, and I'm going to play it even though it cuts off. And this is from Kat from North Carolina.
Hi, this is Kat in Asheville, North Carolina, and I'm calling to let you know what I appreciate about Stephen and Mark. And I also appreciate Matt. I think what I appreciate the most is the complete lack of politics. It is so refreshing. I also really like the little appropriate glimpses into their lives once in a while. I think that makes it real. They don't let it dominate, but it's kind of nice to know that they're real people and they're experiencing this too. My favorite Mark moment was the first time he recorded from his car before a shift in the hospital. And I have to say, I just bawled my eyes out after that. I just couldn't believe that he was headed for a whole day in the hospital and just sounded so tired. And yet he took the time to make.
That's it. So I had to play it because that was such a moving last part. So
yeah, that's really kind.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I think it's. I mean, so thank you to Bruce, Tina, my sister, John, Britt, Kat, for giving these contributions, because I think this is just a nice small symbol of what you guys have contributed to the overall just emotional fatigue and the overwhelm, and putting things in perspective and giving a real voice that's concrete, that's not slanted, that's trying so hard. And like you said, Mark and Stephen, it is so hard for you guys to sit here and come back week after week and offer an opinion that you don't even really know you have the answer to, but yet you stay in that middle ground. You don't fabricate it. You just sit there and you let the audience hang because you yourself don't know. And you may think that you're actually letting the audience down, letting me down, but in fact, you're doing the exact opposite. You're actually giving people motivation and perspective and hope and realizing it's okay. So I know for you, it's probably just daunting. It is exhausting, but for us, we can't be more grateful for you guys coming back week after week. So really, really appreciate it.
Thanks.
We are.
Thanks.
You're absolutely welcome. We're not done. That's done with the audio. Just a couple more things. I know. Hang in there, guys. We're going to hear. This is from Deb.
Oh, thanks, Deb.
I have really loved hearing your podcast every week, partly because you all have good expert info without a political agenda, but on a personal note. A year ago, I was seeing the Kisslers every week, enjoying Mark's cooking, I didn't know you cook so well, being entertained by the Cassettes, which this is new information, nickname for the little Kisslers, trading book ideas with Mark, occasionally watching trashy TV shows, got to follow up on that one, and with Mark and Katie trading books to read and letting Mark and Katie beat me at code names and Sushi Go. Never heard this stuff. Then COVID hit, and suddenly we were on lockdown. So boring. Puppet Zooms with cassettes, my own cooking day after day, picking my own books and watching adult TV shows, and playing gin rummy and Stu every night, and not talking to Mark every week. So I have looked forward to hearing Mark and Stephen every week. And when Mark is working, I've enjoyed hearing Stephen. So fun to get to know both of them as professionals and not just the young guys attached to Katie. Thank you for all the podcast.
If that could be my credential, I would take that. The young guy attached to Katie. That's all I need. That's good. That's good for just like that's my credential. I like that. I'll take that.
Yeah. Let me get back to here. And then I'll do it this way. Here we go. Here's from somebody we don't know of.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Stephen, Mark, and Matt, for all of your hard work and dedication to the Pandemic Podcast. I found an incredible source of wisdom and hope throughout this strange and uncertain time. Thank you, Stephen and Mark, for taking the time out of your crazy schedules week after week for the podcast. I know that both have so incredibly much on your plate, but it means so much to me and so many others to have you explaining epidemiology and medicine to us in real time as these events are unfolding. Thank you, Matt, for everything you have done to make this podcast possible. You do so much work behind the scenes, from gathering the materials necessary for making the podcast to the research you do in the news each week to your thoughtful questions that we all are thinking and don't know quite how to ask. The podcast simply wouldn't exist without your dedication and care. It has given me, my family, a lot of peace. For that, I cannot thank you enough. Thank you all for your continued service to the community. Happy 1 year anniversary. Allie from Massachusetts. I wonder who she is. That would be
no idea.
No clue. No clue. Oh my gosh.
That's great. Thanks.
You're absolutely welcome. Allie, thank you so much for giving that contribution. And she sent me a kind email, and I cannot wait to meet her in person as well. And we all can come out together, have drinks, and have some good food. And before we move into the last couple segments, I couldn't believe, you guys, let me just move this back over here. Oops, wrong one. I can't believe that we have such young listeners. Check this young listener out I just got out from.
We love the podcast because we like hearing Daddy and Theo.
I can't believe this. And check this one out, you guys. Look at this.
Hi, I'm Vera, Mark's daughter, and I'm 7 years old. I want to tell you how much I love your podcast, and I love it because it teaches us about COVID. Love you.
She would have said, I love you. So adorable. Your daughters are incredibly cute. And last but not least, here we go from Katie herself.
And can you just set the stage?
Sorry, wrong one.
Hi, Mark and Stephen and Matt. We love listening to the podcast. It's one of our most special times of the week. We learn so much about COVID and about each of you, and it's a gift to us. So thank you for doing it.
All right. Those are all the thank yous from around the world. I hope you feel appreciated. Thank you so much for the gift.
Well, and I think we need to just pause and give you, Matt, a huge thanks because this has been a tremendous amount of work for you. And you do all the production, you bring the questions, you bring the energy, and the structure to this. And we absolutely would not have happened without you, like not even close. And so I think it's just so you are so crucial, and I'm super grateful because of all the things that this has meant to me for the year. Like you said, even without our listeners, this has been great for me. But what a gift to hear these folks. So thank you for all. This has been a ton of work for you, and we are so grateful.
You're absolutely welcome. It's my pleasure. I mean, it's a gift. It's a labor of love. So I appreciate it, and I'm just thankful we can go to so many listeners as well. I really appreciate it. Well, now let's get to the last segment here. We're running out of time, about 7 minutes left. We have a lot to talk about, so Mark might have to bail out for a little bit. But just quickly, now what? Before we get into this, we want to present this to all of our listeners. We don't know what's next. We know that COVID, the pandemic, well, let's say COVID won't end, but the pandemic will end. It will go to a new normal. This podcast will cease to exist. It'll be no longer relevant. We want to pull our listeners to figure out whether we should continue this or whether we should wrap it up and just call it good when we're done next month or two, whenever things begin to settle in. But we don't know what to do next. Mark and Steve and I have been talking about opportunities, what we could do. We've heard from a handful of listeners that they would like us to continue it and do some form of continue the podcast. And we have some ideas, but we don't know exactly how to do it. So we really appreciate some feedback. So if you guys go to livingthereal.com/pandemic, there's a 2-question form, very simple. livingthereal.com/pandemic. I'll put in the show notes. It's just asking that if we were to continue doing this, when we close up shop on the pandemic, would you want us to continue doing a podcast on something? What would it look like for you? What brings value when all three of us together to help us formulate an idea of if this is worthy of continuing? Because I think we're open to it, right, guys? We're open. Yeah, we definitely are. So I just want to throw that out there to close that up, just to make sure. Please give 3 or 4 minutes if you hang in, livingthereal.com/pandemic, just to give an idea of what we could do to continue this if you guys would like us to continue this podcast. Okay. If we can just do a couple news to land the plane on a couple news things before we close out. Just a couple things. I saw the CDC was warning about an uptick of coronavirus updates. Is that still relevant? Or I just saw it went back down. Or is that still an alarming, or are we still kind of in a mode of caution? Stephen?
Yeah, it's worth us paying attention to. I think that the last couple of weeks, I've been saying that I was expecting sort of a long tail and that we were just going to sort of like slowly cruise down towards sort of summer level COVID. But one of the things that actually caught me by surprise was how quickly cases started to come down. And so, but the corollary to that is that I think because they came down so quickly, we might still be in for another bump that that has to do with the spread of the variants, with different places reopening. So I think, something to watch, something that I've been watching, my colleagues have been watching, but not a cause for huge alarm yet. I don't expect another surge like we saw this winter, but we may be. This is the song that never ends, right? It's just like it goes on and on. So here we go. It's like there may still be another surge before this has sort of had its last word. So hang in there. But
great. Okay, and then on the vaccine level. Johnson & Johnson, a few moments when speaking to this, both of you guys, just because I hear this, people are literally thinking they need to get into Moderna and Pfizer now. Otherwise, they're going to maybe wait until there's more Pfizer or Moderna because they don't want to have a less effective vaccine in Johnson & Johnson. Any way to speak into this kind of like this fear of getting the B team vaccination?
Yeah, from my perspective, these are all like great vaccines, especially insofar as they protect you against severe illness and death. They are very good. And so, maybe I could just speak from a personal perspective, which is that whenever my name gets called and whatever vaccine is available at that time, I'm going to get it. Because from my perspective, any vaccine is better than none by a very long shot. And that's really our ticket, both out of this stage of the pandemic and also towards reducing the spread so that we can prevent the new variants from emerging as well. So it's a great vaccine. And even though the sort of the efficacy on the label isn't necessarily as high as the Pfizer and Moderna ones, it's good at doing the things that we need it to do.
Great. And I'll put in the show notes briefly that I saw just recently that the Johnson & Johnson prevents 90% from hospitalization, and apparently that's even better than Pfizer and Moderna for that particular nuance. So just to put things in perspective, It's not just apples to apples. There's nuances. Mark, anything to say on what you're seeing with the vaccination in your perspective?
No, just that I agree. I think that's a great summation. That this is we're dealing on both the levels of the individual risk and our collective communal risks and responsibilities. And so I just want to echo what Stephen said.
Great. Awesome. Okay. We're going to be signing off once again.
Happy birthday!
All right. We are going to sign off.
I love it.
A little intense. Just a last few things to say. Hey, if you can support us, say at patreon.com/pandemic podcast, there's a little $5 can go a long way, or one-time payments, Venmo, PayPal, all in the show notes. If you would get a hold of Stephen Kissler, StephenKssler on Twitter. If you want to contact us just to say how things are going, how this podcast helped you, Matt@livingthereal.com. And all the stuff will be in the show notes. I want to thank you all so much for joining. Those of you who live, there was about 10 of us at one point in time. Really appreciate hanging in there. We thank you so much for listening and being part of a community. It helps me. It supports me through this long time. And I hope we've been helpful to help you along the way. Take care. Have a wonderful week. We'll be back next Monday with a real episode about all the COVID stuff happening. Take care and bye-bye.